This is an Elevate Her Australia masterclass. Elevate Her Australia is our not-for-profit organisation, social enterprise that really hones in on enabling, encouraging, inspiring women to go for those leadership roles, to have more women at the decision-making tables is our main mission. And to do that, we have we encourage women to get together in circles, in peer circles. We encourage women to network together, build those great relationships. We're doing some education pieces. We've increased that this year. And also we have quite a bit to do with advocacy, anything to do with gender equality in the advocacy space with some of the partners that we're involved with, like the Australian Gender Equality Council and others, UN Women. So whenever there's something that we can get involved in and put our hat in the ring and join hands and do it collaboratively, we also do that. So just so you know a little bit about Elevate Her Australia, obviously that's our website there as well. You can look up and see what we do if you're not familiar with our work. I'm just going to move something across here so I can see this a little better. Wonderful. Okay. I'm assuming everyone can see my slides. If not, please let us know in the chat box. So my name is, for those who don't know me, I think most on the call I have met before or are connected with in our social circles. My name is Jalinda Lee. I say it with a break in the middle. And as you can see with my logo down the bottom, it's got a zebra head in the middle. I have to do that because quite often people call me Jinder Lee. So it's one of those unusual names that's hard to get your tongue around sometimes. But the space that I work in and have been working in for a couple of decades now is in the leadership space. I am the director, founding director of Vital Leaders. And Vital Leaders is our leadership consultancy that we do mostly contracts within government, within local government, within some of the major organisations around just helping grow the leadership capacity in their organisation. Very much into change. I believe leadership is about driving change. It is actually about making sure you have an agility in your culture, a way of bringing the people on board with you as you kind of navigate through those changes. So life is about change, organisations are about change, and it requires that style of leadership. So that's the area that I play in my day job, if you like. Elevate Her Australia is a passion that came out of the work that we started doing with Lean In originally, the Lean In Global Movement and Lean In Circles. And then we sort of saw that we needed to do more in areas that was not so much just on Lean In Circles, but broader networks and the advocacy piece and education. So we founded not-for-profit Elevate Her Australia. So I'm the founding founder, if you like, or co-founder with my partner of Elevate Her Australia and chair of the board at the moment. And then, of course, the Jalinda Lee part is the things that I do around my speaking and my writing. So that's just so you know where I play in this space. I've been a strong feminist for many years. I can tell you stories, but I won't today, about, you know, what I did when I was 13, when I was 18, when I was 21, all around making sure that women or people like myself had the choices rather than feeling like you're railroaded into things that are making you be less than you want to be in life. So I'm very much about making sure that we continue to do that because there's still work to be done, unfortunately, but there is. So I'm going to take you straight into the subject today, which is Banish bias. We have these biases that are around us, and we quite often don't realise that we have bias ourselves. So rather than always just point the finger, we certainly need to recognise when bias is happening, when any kind of bias is happening where people are being discriminated against or not allowed to have the same opportunities as you would normally have or in a fair way. So it's certainly important to recognise it, but often we don't respond. Often we tend to, how would I say, notice it, but either don't think it's our place to say anything or feel like we need to accept it because everybody else has along the way. So this is encouraging us to respond so that we can rectify this, because we really do need to get rid of a lot of the biases that have been around for years, have been accepted for years. Now, I often share this story because it's just also me showing that anyone can have biases. In a decade before this one, I spent 10 years, 11 years in government in a senior leadership position towards the end. And when I think of what we used to say in a laughing way, and, you know, I used to say it because it was something where I had to make decisions around, we had an office full of women, and they were younger women. They were field officers and admin staff. And of course, they were at the age of having children. And we had this chair in the office, and it seemed to be whoever sat in that chair, within 6 months, they were pregnant. So we sort of had this bit of banter of, oh my God, whatever you do, don't go and sit in that chair, because this is what happens. You know, someone get rid of that chair. And I look back at that now and go, how bad was that for those who were planning a family, who were already pregnant but hadn't said anything, who, you know, were just coming back from having a baby and trying to fit that in, you know, into their life with working part-time and juggling, because it was really the message, the underlying message was, whatever you do, don't get pregnant. And so when we look at that, that's one of the things in maternity bias, and we'll get to that in a moment, that sometimes we think it's funny, sometimes it's just a, you know, a throwaway line. But the underlying thing is, you know, we were saying it was causing difficulty in our team because of the amount of people taking leave, coming back part-time, trying to fill 0.2 positions and things like that. It was seen as a hassle, an issue we'd rather not deal with. And so you can see that it doesn't matter who you are in what situation, we really need to be aware of these things and how they play out and how they impact other people. So today we're actually going to be looking at, and the whole idea of the Banish bias workshop or presentation is to recognise it first, then know how to respond so that we can rectify it, so that those same habits and systems that continue to fuel it are actually addressed. As I said, we all have unconscious biases. Our brains just do that. We sort of have, you know, these mental shortcuts, as it says here, and it leads to stereotyping. So what happens is, this is the way we do it, this is how we think about this. So our brain immediately goes to, there's your answer. That was your answer yesterday. That was your answer last year. That was how someone else did it last week. That's how it is, rather than really looking deeper into it. So it's a shortcut, if you like. We make snap judgments about people, and often that's quite harmful, instead of asking out of curiosity, finding out more. We often find it hard to admit, but as I just pointed out before, no one's immune to holding biases. And it's not always unconscious. You'll have a lot of organisations that take their employees through understanding bias, and that it's unconscious bias and no one means anything by it, but it's just how it happens, so we need to be aware. Some of the bias that's out there is actually not unconscious. It's done deliberately. It's done in a way that, you know, it is meant to discriminate so that the outcome they're looking for is the type of person they want. And of course, those things are just the hideous stuff that we need to get rid of in a society where we are looking for fairness. We're looking for equal choices, equal chances, and equal opportunities. So that's where we're aiming for. So I know I can't actually ask you this at the moment because I think you're on mute, and I'll just check. Yes, I've just let another person in. Thank you. I wanted to know, do you know, maybe you can put it in the chat box, do you know how many times more often men interrupt women? Rather than, you know, them interrupting men. So how many times more often do men interrupt women? Know the answer? It's actually 3 times more often. There's research and surveys done on this, and it's quite interesting. And, you know, again, not understanding always why that is the case, but often it's just a habit. Often they're not aware. In performance reviews, and this is something that a lot of studies have been done on, there is often negative feedback given to women when their personal style tends to be a little bit more assertive. And so in performance reviews, What percentage do you think of women receive that sort of negative feedback on their personal style, such as, you can sometimes be a little bit too abrasive, a bit assertive, you need to tone it down a bit? Okay? What percentage of men receive that same sort of feedback? Is anyone aware? It's very interesting. It's massively different. 66% of women get told that. And when I was in the public sector, I was told, because I am quite extrovert and I am quite forward in putting ideas forward and my opinions and my input into projects, I was often told to tone it down, particularly at higher level tables where there was a protocol as to who could speak and who couldn't speak. It was really interesting. Whereas I never, ever saw any of the guys told to, you know, sit down, be quiet and, you know, let somebody else have a go. So that's really interesting. Now, in Australia, what percentage of women hold positions on boards that are like CEOs of large corporations, you know, board positions, or in those really top senior level decision-making roles? Do you know what percentage? Again, quite interesting. We've got a way to go. It is 18% of board chairs, 33% of directors. This is across Australia, 19.4% of CEOs, and 35% of senior leadership are held by women. Now, these stats are from last year. I haven't checked just prior to coming on whether that has changed. The Workforce Gender Equality Agency is where we get these figures from, and they do a report each year. But, you know, given the glacial speed of change that's happened over the years, they are around about this. They haven't changed very much. There's no wow moments where we've moved the dial, you know, considerably. So this quote is exactly why we do what we do in Elevate Her Australia. This quote is exactly why we need to be aware of what is holding women back. Because a society that fails to harness, to bring on board that energy, that creativity, that different level of thinking that women bring to decision-making tables, organisations, communities, councils, governments that don't have that equality at the decision-making tables are at a huge disadvantage in this modern society. And of course, we all know that now, but it's about moving towards that. It's not enough to just say it and know it. We need to be still putting systems and processes in place to change that. So I'm going to take you through now 6 of the biases that has come. This has actually come from the work that we've done with Lean In Global Movement. Lean In have done a lot of research work with major organisations like McKinsey and Harvard University and places like that, where they have really put together what they feel are the 6 core biases that women face. And so if you are actually, and I know we've got a couple online here, if you are actually running a peer circle and you're wanting to actually do this with your peer circle, you can go onto the leanin.org site and you will find that there are some work that they've done around biases, and these are the 6 main ones, and there's a number of scenarios that are under each one. So I am just acknowledging that we're using some of that, but I'm also today going to add an extra one. So let's get into it, because I know that we'll run out of time otherwise. And as I said before, if I do this as a workshop, we have more time to discuss each bias around the table, and that's really helpful. And also we can, if we're doing that within an organisation, we can actually create, you know, tailor the scenarios to suit your organisation. So that's a real advantage. All right, I'm going to start with performance bias. Now, performance bias is actually really deep-rooted, as it says here, but it's based on assumptions about what women's natural abilities are compared to what men's natural abilities are. And so we constantly tend to underestimate women's performances over men's performances. So, you know, it's often in things like where you are, you know, awarding someone, rewarding someone, giving them a promotion, for instance, or they're going for a role and you're looking at the CVs and things, women are often hired only if they've got proven extensive experience and past accomplishments in that same kind of thing. Whereas men, interestingly, are hired quite often on future potential. Like, you know, he's got that go-getter thing. And we also know that a lot of women won't go for jobs because of this unless they've got 90 to 100% of all the boxes ticked on the position description, whereas men will often go for a job at 50%, knowing that they can bluff their way through the rest and they have the confidence to sell themselves at an interview. And the interviewers, the panel tend to, you know, see that potential as well, which is really interesting. When we have really high level women and they're doing great things, it's their competence is often more questioned than males' competence is. So when there's, let's say, a woman really portraying a great idea, really leading the way and doing something different, she has to go through a lot more hoops and questions and brick walls to get there, which is really interesting. And so what that leads to is missed opportunities, lower performance ratings, and lack of career progression. And, you know, there is still sometimes you'll see in people's language that real surprise that's expressed about women's strong skills and capabilities, like somehow that's unusual. I know we're changing and we're seeing more of that now, but we need to make sure that we're not hearing still some of those things that come out of people's mouths about, oh, and she's a woman too, you know, like that's something unusual. So here's a scenario around performance bias. You're in a meeting to discuss performance reviews and you notice that the men are described as strategic and visionary, while the women are maybe described as hard workers or good team players. And why that matters is that the way we describe people, just as I said before, the way that we kind of, you know, respond to how well perhaps a woman's doing in a role is really important because it unfairly influences performance reviews. So in this particular situation, it's not hard to imagine that men will get kind of like an inside kind of, you know, forward straight trajectory into promotions, whereas a woman will have to sort of really prove that she is as strategic and visionary as the men. And in these scenarios, these are like cards that I've printed here and put onto our webinar today. If you are at a table, we have these on printed cards. In this, what I think is really important is not just to be aware of it, obviously, but is how to respond. So what to do. So what they're actually suggesting here is you point out that this is a bit of a pattern that you've observed and you explain why it matters, you know, like how this is. Sometimes it's really good when it's, you know, doesn't appear to be a level playing field about how people's performances are being viewed. It's good to talk to the CEO or the HR manager about perhaps creating a framework or a checklist of what are the leadership attributes they're looking for with some really clear examples, because then that will help to make it sort of less biased and everyone's kind of, you know, going off the same tick sheet, if you like, and it's more of a level playing field. They also suggest that excuse me, clear definitions used across all aspects of reviews, whether it's recruitment, whether it's role descriptions, that there's really clear definitions, and that helps to remove the bias. So I'm wondering whether you've actually come across some performance bias. Feel free to add to the chat on anything that you'd like to share in relation to that, you know, a small example of, is this still happening in your organization or where you've been in the past? Let's look at attribution bias. This is very, very similar to performance bias. It's quite closely linked. And this is where we view women less competent than men. We give them less credit for their accomplishments and we tend to blame them more for their mistakes. So we often see that unless there's a women's award, women are often not being recognised for the work that they do. That's why there's been so many women in leadership, women in business, women in industry awards that have popped up, because they just weren't being noticed. And women's contributions are often less valued. And as we said earlier, their input is often talked over or interrupted. And so sometimes we women tend to play down or underestimate our own performance. just, because we perhaps have seen that happen, we start to believe that perhaps we don't have the level that we need to have. And then we think that maybe we'll do worse than we actually would. And so that does create self-doubt, as it says here. A bit of reluctance to take those higher level positions. And it does tend to undermine someone's confidence, of course. So looking at a scenario of attribution bias, let's look at this one. Picture yourself on a review committee and several members are arguing against a woman's promotion because she's kind of not seen as a leader, even though her team delivers, the team that she leads, delivers outstanding results. Now, why this matters is with review committees can often make incorrect and unfair assumptions about women's abilities. It tends to, if they've got a really narrow definition of what leadership is, they may unfairly exclude a lot of people because her style isn't necessarily what they think the style of a leader needs to be. This is particularly important with women who are not loud, bold, oozing confidence, but they just get in and get the work done. That doesn't make them less of a leader. So what to do? Point out the woman's achievements and her team results. I mean, they're obviously, demonstrating leadership capabilities by the fact that they've got such great results, and that performance speaks for itself. Ask the other people on the review committee who may be commenting, ask them to explain the attributes they think she lacks. Also, a longer-term solution may be to develop clear metrics, again, like we said before, where you've got clear frameworks for reviewing leadership capabilities. I've just noticed that I'm out of water and I'm getting croaky. So I'll just ask if Gary could possibly bring me some water. That would be wonderful. Now, when we have those clear metrics, we can then show that everyone is measured by the same standards. And of course, then we don't have a difficulty in being able to prove that someone has those levels that we're looking for. So I'm just putting this in as a little break between the 6 that we're going through. That's 2. And so far, we've actually looked at performance and we've looked at attribute bias. So our next one we're going to look at is likability bias. But before we go there, I want to just show you how this works out. So women are quite likely going to be holding, especially in government agencies, in large corporations, they're quite likely going to be holding team leader or middle management roles. And women in director and CEO levels, are less common throughout a lot of organizations. So therefore, they're often thought not to be strategic or visionary or, big picture thinkers. And if you're like me and you think outside the box and you're not afraid to tell someone about what your ideas are or what you've just, what you're just thinking, the input, the something different, drive a bit of change around here, then you're viewed as, excuse the French, scary shit. And, often then thought of as unusual or less communal or not quite the fit we're looking for. Heard that plenty of times. And if you are doing that as a CV, like you're actually putting things like I've done on a CV before is first thing that describes me as a change champion, you're often not considered for a role, especially at senior management level, as you're perceived as maybe a threat or maybe someone who's going to be difficult to deal with by that same level. So that's why I've put the file at the bottom. Often the file is seen to be at the bottom when you are a female that is really quite out there and bold and driving change. That comes into what the next one is, which is likability bias. Excuse me, I've just had some water brought to me, which is fantastic. Okay. Likability bias. This is nasty. This is this kind of tightrope that women have to walk on. That's kind of the expectations that men will be assertive when they lead, and that's, that's just expected. And women will be this kind and communal. And if they assert themselves, Not that they're not being kind, but if they become a bit assertive, then we tend to like them less. We tend to call them bossy, too ambitious, too aggressive. And so we are hit with what we call a likability penalty. And it's a real tightrope, because if we don't show enough leadership and assertiveness and decisiveness, we don't get the roles. But if we do it a little bit too much, we don't have that likability that's expected of women in any roles, but particularly in leadership. So women are often thought to be less competent due to being agreeable and nice. So, like I said before, in the performance and the attribution bias, if we're too soft and too, everybody getting on the team nicely, they're not, some review panels may see that as not showing strong, strategic, decisive leadership. But if we're too the other way, what leads to, obviously, what it says here is inconsistency, lack of congruence to, what someone's natural behavior type is, and lack of career progression. So a scenario here, and of course you would all know these, is this one. Let's say you hear a woman being criticised for her leadership style. For example, she's been called aggressive or, too out for herself, because when women assert themselves, as it says here, in a direct style, or even promoting themselves or promoting their ideas, they often get a negative reaction, which is in quite stark contrast to what men do or what men get. And this discrepancy has had a huge impact on women's career. It really has. This likability bias just does your head in, because you just never know whether you're quite on the right side of that tightrope that we walk on, as I said before. So here's what to do. It's a fairly common thing that, and I've heard lots of people do this already, but it really needs to be done. When the criticism is made in the moment, not later on, but in the moment, you need to be able to ask or address the person who's making that criticism in a way that isn't judgmental, not jumping on them, but in a curious tone, like, that's interesting. I'm really curious here. Would you have had that same reaction if a man did the same thing? Okay, so you're doing it out of curiosity. Yes, you're still asking the difficult question, but you are at least calling it out when it happens in a way that's curious about why that's happening. So point out that being focused or assertive or decisive about leading the organisation forward is exactly what's expected of leaders. And if it's applicable or needed, point out that being ambitious, if that's what, she's too ambitious, she's too out for herself, that being ambitious and wanting to make a bigger difference is absolutely not a negative thing in either a man or a woman. More water. We're going to go into maternal bias next. And in maternal bias, of course, it's similar to the example that I used earlier. It's where we sort of trigger false assumptions that, women will be less committed to their careers and even less competent just because they're planning to have children, just because they're having children, just because they're juggling a few things. Of course, there's so much work that needs to be done around equal parenting and equal opportunities for men and women to share the caring of children in the workplaces as well. But this really leads to missed opportunities. I'm sorry, I'm just going to have a break for a second. I haven't done any talking today until this, so we often don't know that, you're a bit dry in the throat until you start, so my apologies. So when we come to the maternal bias, I think we're doing better with that now, because there's been so much emphasis on joint parenting, on parental leave, on all of the flexibility, particularly during COVID, around sharing the workload at home. So while we are doing better than perhaps we have been in the maternal bias, we're certainly more aware of it. We still need to be aware that we don't make those assumptions when it comes to hiring or promoting a woman, because it often leads to missed opportunities, lack of career progression, and continually having to sort of prove that they're committed. So we find often mothers, women with young children, often do more hours just to try and prove that when they do need to take an hour off to go and pick a child up or something, that they've done 3 hours instead. And, that becomes a really difficult thing for a lot of women when they just get so burnt out from how much they do. So we've got to make sure that we don't have those expectations unfairly. This is an interesting twist, and I thought I'd throw this one in as a scenario. This is about a guy. Someone complains to you that a new dad on the team is taking too much of his allotted family leave. And like I was just saying, we need to encourage men to be doing more of this. But while it's new for some organizations, you may find that someone complains or does a throwaway line or, some sort of, gosh, he's off again, like how sick can kids be? This kind of stuff can be just thrown away lines where it really is undermining the thought of men taking time out for bonding with new babies, for caring for sick kids, for even caring for their aging parents. You'd be surprised, or maybe you won't, of the number of women I know that have to take time off to care for parents, but the parents are their in-laws. And the guys are actually not taking, or the men are not necessarily taking, or feel they can't take time off to do that same thing. So we need to really look at the fairness of that. And also it's just a habit. It's just an old way of thinking about who does the caring. It has no place in today's modern society. And so it's about calling it out when we see it happening. So, of course, the answer here is to stand up for your colleague on leave. So when you see this happening, obviously in the moment again, state the positives of how great it is when dads are really equally involved in their children's lives, and point out why that matters, how family leave is good for all workers. It's good for families, it's good for company reputation, and it's definitely good for knowing that that's an employer of choice that I want to work for. It's also important to remind them that no one, man or woman, should be forced to choose between being a good employee or a good parent, because both is possible and should be encouraged. And the systems and processes need to be in place in workplaces that is not unusual, that it is more than accepted, it's encouraged. I love this quote from Jane Goodall. It actually doesn't take very much. And if we refer back to the likability bias that I just talked about one before this, it doesn't take much to be considered to be a difficult woman in this world. But then she says, but that's why there are so many of us. And I think if you can take that away from today, just know that others may consider you as difficult, but if you're being assertive and you're driving change and you're calling out bias, then that's exactly what we're asking you to do, and that we are encouraging you to be the leaders, to be the change, to help drive that change. So I'm going to take you now. We've done 4. I'm going to go for 6, so let's try that. I'm going to take you now to affinity bias. This is really interesting, and this is about how we tend to sort of be drawn towards, or as it says here, gravitate toward people like ourselves, people who look like us in appearance, people who have the same beliefs, have the same value system, have the same background, have the same experiences. In leadership roles, it'll often be what we call like for like. People who are just like me, they'll fit in really well. They've got the same kind of leadership approach, exactly what we're looking for. And we do that because we want to avoid distrust or even dislike, in our workplaces, in our teams, and we tend to think that people that are too different from us are just not a good fit. And we hear that a lot, particularly if you are going for positions and promotions, not necessarily promotions in your own place, but a position in a new organisation. Often the one-liner when you don't get the job is, we just felt you weren't quite the right fit, not quite what we were looking for. And so while that may be the case, and you don't know the ins and outs of that because they often don't give you enough detail around it, I often find that that's a cheap way out or an excuse for, we were really looking for someone more like this, more this type of style, more like us, more like the people we already have surrounding us. So be aware that when mentors and leaders say that they are inclined to be attracted to proteges, as it says here, or to others, potential candidates, that remind them of themselves. Just really hone in on that, Are they hiring what we call same or mini-me's? Hiring managers tend to interview people or choose to interview people that are similar to themselves, so watch for that. Or similar to the previous person who just left the role, and similar backgrounds to the majority of people, again, for a good fit. Interestingly, here, another point around straight white men in positions of power, which is the predominant sector that we have in the higher level positions of power. They tend to gravitate towards men that are more like themselves, and they ignore lots of different options of bringing more diversity into their team. So lack of diversity and inclusion is huge, and we are getting better at that, but we still need to be very aware of it, because there's still people out there that don't realize they're doing that. Some of that is just their habit, their natural liking or being drawn to a particular style of person. It can also, in a team that doesn't have diversity, lead to much poorer decision making. So here's a scenario around that. You realize that a colleague in your team who is a man tends to only mentor other men. Now, when it comes to mentoring, a lot of that is done informally. Sometimes it's done formally, but often it's where they see someone who has the potential and within their team who's just like them. And, if I, tap him on the shoulder and mentor him, really, give him the extra projects, work side by side with him on things, it's going to be quite kind of critical to the success of that person. They get a smooth ride across to, what even the next opportunities or promotions are. But if they only do that with the men, obviously, then the women who work within that organization that may have just as good as skills and bring perhaps a slightly different way of thinking to the role, they often miss out. They'll also miss out on the advice from, maybe this person is a really good role model that, they would really get a lot of growth and potentially more opportunities from being mentored by someone with such vast experience. So all round, they're being, overlooked right from that early mentoring stage. So the best way to deal with this, because it is quite personal, is to talk to this colleague one-on-one, not in front of everyone, not straight away, or this is something that you've noticed, you've just realized it. It's kind of like a habit you've just, you've seen. So it's an easy one to sort of just talk and, obviously, again, out of curiosity, explain why mentoring is so valuable, and that it's great that he's doing mentoring, but you've noticed that perhaps he only mentors with men. And just out of curiosity, as I said before, curious tone always, never judgmental. Suggest that maybe, Mary, one other woman, another person here that you've seen has great potential, she might actually gain a lot out of his mentoring as well. So you're giving a suggestion of at least one woman that he may consider to do the same sort of mentoring with. And just be aware that sometimes men do feel uncomfortable about being alone with a woman, and they don't want to sort of get into that stage where someone's, making rumors around what might be happening. And so, you may be able to suggest, some quite public places to meet, or otherwise some quite formal arrangements in, meeting rooms within the organisation within working hours. And then it's quite clear to people what's happening rather than assumptions. And the sixth one, and remember, these are the key or core biases, the most common ones that we deal with. This is a biggie because it goes across the whole sector. So intersectionality bias is where bias isn't just limited to gender. I will give you a hint. It also links to my seventh bias that I've put in here as well. Because women experience compounded, as it says here, discrimination due to a number of things, due to race, sexual orientation, disability, obviously gender to start with, any other aspects, and all the things that we just talked about can happen, several things at once. But particularly, due to their race, due to the colour, women of colour often face double discrimination. She's female, she's a woman of colour, English might not be her first language. They're less likely to gain as much support from managers and have the same level of access to the senior leaders, generally more slowly promoted. So these are the studies that have been done on this, and particularly in America. Obviously, Lean In is an American organisation, and some of their data and studies are, swayed a bit more to American. But when they talk about, Latinas, when they talk about the Black women in America, they talk about your other migrants, your Indians, all of that kind of thing. It's really quite noticeable how different it is with this intersectionality bias, where women are trying to sort of navigate through a number of different biases. Obviously, your sexual orientation too is mentioned in this particular slide. And immigrated or immigrant women may be marginalised, often due to things like their traditions that are within their race, within their language, their religion. And some of that can be in relation to the way they dress, in relation to the way they are committed to their family, and are the first person in their family that needs to sort of do things when something in the broader family, the extended family, happens. So we see this in our Indigenous communities as well. And it's not just women, it's that whole intersectionality of what happens within cultures, within different races and different organisations, and how they handle that. So it leads to missed opportunities, lack of career progression, underrepresented views at decision-making tables, because, of course, we're not necessarily promoting these women to leadership positions where they are at decision-making tables. So here's the scenario. Your team is a great social team. They hold regular happy hours after work for networking and bonding down at the local pub, down at the local bar. And you realise that one colleague in particular, a Muslim woman, never goes. She's never come. Now, why this matters is that we need to understand the cultures and the different, value systems that people have. And some Muslims avoid alcohol altogether, and they may feel very uncomfortable being in a bar. And if most of your networking events are going to be held in a bar or involve lots of alcohol, it means that some people will opt out every time, then they miss out on the team bonding that could lead to career opportunities. When you are doing that kind of thing and you're talking, we talk about the water cooler discussions that happen in the hallways. They miss out on some of that if the most of that networking is done in a situation like this. It can also send a message that employers who don't drink are really, not a good fit for this organisation, because, that's what we all do. And other groups like, caregivers, those who need to be leaving work to go home to actually do their second job, their caring and stuff, are often not considered when social events are planned. So, the response to this is quite obvious, but it's still something that can often just, go to the keeper, not a high priority. It is what it is. Instead of really looking at, all it takes is having more of a discussion with the happy hour organizer or the team that's organizing these functions, and just let them know why it matters, that inclusion is so important. Suggest that perhaps they plan a wide range of networking events that don't potentially leave people out. So obviously, there's a number of things you can do that don't require you to be down at the pub after 5. So just different times, some other hours, lunch times perhaps, that may better suit working parents that need to leave, straight away to pick up children from daycare. So it's important also, now this is an important point, when you're actually trying to suggest changes in relation to intersectionality issues, it's really important to make those changes sensitively. And by sensitively, I mean not deliberately pointing out one particular person that's missing out all the time. Don't, point that one person out or blame or shame them. Actually do it in a very sensitive way that, we think it would be great to have some different stuff. We're getting about sick of going to the same place all the time. Let's try, and it's an easy way of making sure that we're just doing it in a way that's sensitively including people rather than pointing out their differences. Now that's the 6. I did say to you at the start that I'm going to just very quickly, and I'm only just touching on this because it's a whole other masterclass, but there is a 7th insidious bias. It fits with intersectionality, but it's not specifically mentioned here. And it's a growing issue because we have so many working women that have come through the sectors. Like I'm 60, so my age, the 50-year-olds coming through the sector, they've worked all their life and suddenly they hit this. Ageism bias. Oh my gosh. Ageism bias is just the most insidious bias that women need to cope with towards the end of their careers. And sometimes it starts as young as 45. But, towards the end of their careers, when they're not considered for those higher level leadership roles, despite the experience, the qualifications, the degrees they've got, it comes back to seeing a woman getting older. Maybe she's not quite, up to it. Maybe she's, not quite as attractive. And let's get into that just quickly, because I've only got one slide on this that I wanted to share with you. As I said, it's the most insidious bias. It is fueled, and we know this, it's fueled by media. It's fueled by the print media, the movies. Like, how many really older women do you see in movies in the lead roles in a leadership position? We're starting to see a few more because we've got the likes of Judi Dench and a number of others that are really pushing for that. But, we've been brought up on this idea that it's the young and beautiful in the movies. Music as well, what was the song I was thinking of the other day? I know, and I won't be able to sing it real well with my throat. Will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 64? Do you remember that song? I mean, it really, points out the fact that, when I get older, like, am I still going to be what you're looking for? And we need to just remove that or change that mindset and that thinking that young is good and old is bad, or old is past it. Young is with it, old is past it. Young is attractive, old is ugly. Young is trendy and lots of new ideas, and old is simply out of touch. Because that's just, and excuse the French, that's just bullshit. Okay, it is just entrenched societal thinking. So it's come from marketing as well, with the anti-aging products and stuff and procedures that are around, that are constantly being pushed about how to stay looking younger. It's the social media stuff that we see where there's, filters, airbrushing, everything needs to be young and attractive. And that's the sort of stuff that gets pushed into your feeds with the algorithms a lot more than, let's say, a video or a talk done by an older person, a wise, experienced older person, nonetheless. And, that societal influence tends to sort of have different ways in which we have assumptions and expectations about what it means to be old, and also the way we converse around aging. So I wanted to just, I have a whole lot of other things, and I've actually got a talk tonight that I'm doing on ageism, but I wanted to just bring it to your attention that while there was these 6, and we went through them before, biases that are the most common, be aware of this one too, because it's really raising its head and it's quite nasty. And you are never too old and never too late to make an impact. And we need to, when we're talking about young and old, as I've got here on the slide, we need to understand that what young means is simply that you've lived a short time or a shorter time. Old means you've lived for a long time or a longer time. It's just that. It's not good, bad, attractive, ugly, on point or out of touch. So what do we do about this? Well, silence is never a response. And this is actually a non-response, isn't it? But silence actually brings about an assumed acceptance or assumed understanding that we are accepting of those biased behaviours because we've not called them out. So we encourage you at Elevate Her Australia, I encourage you in the work that I do around gender equality and stamping out a lot of these biases to don't be afraid to speak up and to use some of the things we've talked about today to help you with that language and to help you find solutions. Speak up and stamp out bias against women, bias against, anything that is unfair and discriminatory in the workplaces and also in your communities. So it is recognizing first. Don't just kind of walk around in a fog and, not really notice what's happening, but also recognizing your own assumptions and biases, your own imperfections, and the impact that some of perhaps what you do, still do, sometimes do, can have a flow-on effect, and how you might be able to respond in a more thoughtful way. And then make the changes, like get rid of the old habits and systems. And in relation to the last one I mentioned, the ageism bias, really question your thinking about that, because there's an entrenched mindset of it being something to be feared. And so we need to question our mindset as to where that's come from, and is that still accurate, or has it ever been accurate? So just recapping, when bias occurs, there's a number of ways to respond, and most of the scenarios I've given you today tend to be around these things. Speak up in the moment, okay? Ask a probing question, but in a curious manner, not a judgmental manner. Stick to the facts. Here's the facts. This is what I saw. This is what's happening. Tell me why, okay? And then explain how bias may be in play here, and that we need to actually look at changing some of the policies and processes to make sure that doesn't happen. So it's a simple thing, it's a simple reminder, but it is necessary that we do some things, that we do respond, we do try to rectify this. I hope that that's been helpful for you today. As I said before, this is I think it's much better, because I like interactive. It is much better when we can look at scenarios more deeply. And if you have an opportunity to bring something like this to your organisation, where you can have people sitting at round tables and they're working through the scenarios that are already happening in their organisation or happened a year ago, or things that they're aware of, are much more powerful when you can work on what will we do next time. I find people walk away with, I wish I would have, but next time I will. And that's really important for us. The other way to use this kind of material that we're sharing with you today in this masterclass is to use it in your peer circles. We absolutely encourage women to get together in supportive circles. And, if you've got supportive men as well, we're not saying men aren't allowed, but just, when you're looking at how do we as women approach some of these things that we come up against, it's often good to get together in circles. They don't have to be a registered lean-in circle. They can be just a peer circle within your organisation or a peer circle within your community. But I truly believe this. Every time women gather together in circles or some sort of collective with a really intentional purpose of supporting each other, having each other's back, lifting each other up together, then the whole world heals and grows a little more, and we can get rid of things like these biases, and we can do it together collectively and have a stronger voice. And that's what Elevate Her is all about. It is actually about connecting together, communicating through the things like we're doing today, and through our circles, the support that we do, communicating through our newsletters. So we are trying to sort of, get women talking together about these things, and also about what we do collaboratively when we work with other organisations in our advocacy stuff. So if you want to know more about what Elevate Her Australia does, pop onto the website. It's just there at the bottom of the screen. And we really encourage you to get involved. To become a member is free. And these masterclasses at the moment are free. We will be gradually bringing more of these in. They won't always be a webinar like this with me talking on a particular topic. We'll do some panels. We will do some interviews with one-on-one with some strong female leaders and role models. And we're looking forward to bringing more of these to you.